Habits are up to 50% of our day. So think about how we are walking around talking to ourselves, what we're thinking, what we're saying, how we're feeling. If we can make those habitual thoughts and feelings more nourishing and kind and useful, like what a better environment to live in.
Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where today I'm very excited to bring on a special guest for you, talk all things autoimmunity, diabetes included, and that would be Amy Behimer. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you so much. I love when our worlds collide. And yeah, like you said, I talk a lot about autoimmunity and specifically for your audience, diabetes. So I love it.
I was going to say, we're going to have a lot of fun because I feel like it's a topic it needs to get talked about. I just have never done a deep dive on this show with it. So I feel like people are going to be very happy.
Well, and I think, the news reports these rising trends in autoimmunity. And so whether it's you, or I feel like it's people's kids or parents or friends, like there's like this overwhelming feeling in the air that, okay, autoimmunity, should I be paying more attention to this? What is happening? So I'm hoping that someone can learn a thing or two.
Well, and as we dive into, I feel like people are going to want to know, like, why should I listen to her? So tell us just a little of your background so people know a little bit about Amy, the human being.
All right. Yeah. So I remember once, you have your letters after your name. And it's like, but if people are looking at those, it's like what they really want to know is, yeah, can I help you?
Right.
Will this be helpful? So from the alphabet soup letters, I'm a PharmD, so doctor of pharmacy. I feel like that gives me, almost 20 years of learning a whole lot about the human body, what goes right, what goes wrong, as well as, medications and those mechanisms. But that's like the conventional medicine side of things, which we know diabetes relies heavily on. Then the other letters, the most pertinent ones would be nationally board certified health and wellness coach. So up until now, being a health and wellness coach is kind of unregulated. There's a lot of people calling themselves coaches, and there is a National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching. So for that terminology specifically, that now there's a certification. And so the goal eventually will be that to be a official health and wellness coach, you will have this board certification again, which just ensures there's some science behind the things we're doing. Why we say coaching works and the studies and the research, it's because we are able to apply these principles. And so aside from that, the real reason you should listen is that I am an autoimmune patient right along with you or with whoever you're listening to this podcast for. So my first autoimmune diagnosis was vitiligo, which was on my skin when I was 16, followed by a thyroid autoimmune diagnosis. There was an IBD one thrown in there. And then at 27, multiple sclerosis. That was the one that was not flying under the radar. That really stopped me, got my attention. And it was kind of a before and after in life of this was my life before. Now this is my life after, when I'm going to listen to these whispers that are now screams and do something different with the data that my body was telling me.
Well, and I think what's really interesting is you brought up, hey, you were in your 20s, and there's a lot of people with diabetes more and more prevalently in the recent years where they're getting diagnosed with, latent onset diabetes in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s, and there's life before and there's life after. So not to just jump into how did your life, change for the better and trying to frame it positively, but how much did it feel like your life was just overhauled out of nowhere?
Quite a bit by my doing, though. So I would say that might be one difference between, let's say, type 1 diabetes. You don't really have a choice. All of a sudden, insulin's going to be a part of your life. I almost feel that I took the same approach of overhaul, but it was really with a why behind it of this is my potential mobility, my independence, a 4th, 5th, 6th diagnosis. And so at first, definitely, it wasn't like, oh, this is going to be such a good thing and a blessing. And a lot of my clients will say, well, I'm not there yet. And it's okay not to be naturally just finding all the gratitude and the abundance. It's a practice. And it's something even today, I've been diagnosed for almost 14 years. Even today, it's still a practice. And, I speak in habits. That's the juicy, wonderful vehicle I use to make any good change in my life. And that's how I help clients do it as well. And so it's a habit that we build to experience what could feel like a blow, even today, things happen, and have the habit of pairing it with what did I learn from it? What other perspective is there to look at it? Acknowledging that the negative side of things never goes away. We just try to make more room for the positive to have a seat at the table so that it's not so imbalanced.
Well, and I think you touching on the mindset side, I know within diabetes, it's paramount and I talk about it constantly, but I feel like in the autoimmune spectrum as it is, it has to be something you're bringing to the table of you have to be positive, or if you can't find it, find something, in diabetes, it might be, oh, I'm really on top of my nutrition now because I got diagnosed with this thing, instead of, well, I can't eat anything. My life sucks. This is terrible.
Yeah. I mean, my entire reason that I became a coach, so, as a pharmacist and 15 years into my career to say, God, I want to go back and do this thing, was because of working with a coach who I would call a mindset coach, meaning I'll never forget these things that feel like facts or truth to us, like, oh, I can't eat that, or this is a restriction. I remember I said in passing one day, well, my life is always going to be worse because I have this. And the bravery of her reflecting that back to me to say, that is a thought that is not necessarily a truth. And so that mindset shift of it's possible my life is not worse because of this opens up a whole new direction of feeling and actions to try to prove that thing true. And so then now, 14 plus years later, you would have a really hard time trying to convince me that my life isn't better because I made that thought the habitual one that I practiced to become a belief like deep in my soul.
Well, and with that, because I was going to say actionable things, I feel like in diabetes land, but just everywhere, tend to be the best thing. So people can just start hitting the ground running to create that mindset, to basically set that thermostat to, I'm going to be in a positive mindset when it comes to fill in the blank autoimmune condition. What would be something someone could do right now that would allow them to start taking that road?
That's such a good question. Such a good question. And because if you're listening and you can hear someone like me say something like that, or you see a quote, let's say on Instagram, and it's really fluffy and it feels really kind of out there, I feel like the first thought is going to be, well, that must be nice to think that way, but I don't think that way. And I like to say one of my superpowers is to show the work behind that, is to say, here's where we'd like to get to. Kind of like when you were in school, like you can't just give the answer. Right. You have to show what steps, multiplication, dividing, how did you get there? So the work behind that, again, my approach is that mindset habits, which are repetitions of thought and feeling, that's the work to get there, where that becomes the autopilot, that becomes normal. So how do you get stronger with anything? Repetitions, conscious repetition. So it would start with this. It would start with right now, finding a thought or a belief, which is just a thought we've thought so many times we think it's true, or an opinion that we're extremely loyal to. So find what is one thought that just doesn't feel good when you think it? Which thought kind of keeps you feeling frustrated or discouraged? That's the weed that we want to pluck. And so we want to plant a belief seed in its place so that our brain has somewhere to go to nurture it, give it attention, and let that new seed grow into the belief that we want it to be. So one example to do this is, let's say, what's an example of something that your listeners really want to embrace or get behind but can feel hard?
I would say probably confidence with blood sugars during exercise. That'd be an easy example.
Okay. All right. So let's try this. So it could be something like this. It could be starting and writing things down helps so much to see the clarity and again, get that repetition. But it could be something like, I would feel confident about my blood sugars during exercise, but then how would you fill that in?
It could be, but I always crash every time I go for a walk.
Yes. So that piece, that second part, is the weed that we are going to work at wiggling loose. So now let's get the seed that we want to plant. I would feel confident about my blood sugar during exercise, and
I know what to do prior, so I'm not going to go low.
Yeah. So that's the belief seed that we can plant. So each time we notice that our brain wants to fall into that old habit of the but, the thing that is taking us away from it, we just recognize it and we say, oh, okay, we're going over here. I do know more than I realize. Or do you remember that one time that you didn't crash? What was happening then? Then all of a sudden we get super curious and we start to throw some attention, which is like fertilizer. We throw some attention on the thought and the belief that we want to take hold and we want to become the habitual one that our brain goes, oh, I know where to go with this.
Well, and I feel like what you're doing is, and I always call it like thought challenging to people, where I'm like, hey, you have this thought, which in your case, I'm confident with my numbers during exercise, but fill in the blank, your way is way faster. But I would always say, if you have a thought in your head, stop, freeze. Okay, what is the evidence for this? What is the evidence against this? And can I come up with an alternate way of thinking about it? So we're doing, I feel like, very similar things, but whatever the people listening, whatever, if you're listening to this, whether you like my route, whether you like Amy's route, challenging the thought and saying, let's recreate this and reset the thermostat about that particular situation, that is going to be paramount no matter the method.
Well, and it's no shock that we're doing the same things because it is absolutely ancient wisdom and modern science. Like they all agree. I would say the coolest part about the time we're living in today is that in the past 10, 20 years, the field of neuroscience and the evidence around neuroplasticity, I think that the ancient wisdom and the philosophers, they were doing this without any evidence that it was possible to actually rewire our brain to think and to feel in these ways that we want to with some like deliberate intention. Now we're like getting the evidence and the science, which as my PharmD background is like, yes, I love seeing that there was a study on this. And, the studies are just really cool to see. And so, yeah, I love for everybody listening, you, me, and everybody, we're all saying the same thing. Find the version that makes sense to you and go with it.
And I would say, do it today, because otherwise, I'll do it tomorrow turns into, I'll do it next week, which turns into, it's been 6 months. What happened?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things when people be like, what's your one piece of advice? I often come back to start today, but not only start today in some sort of way that you feel it. And there's like a line in the sand.
Yep.
So sometimes it's like signing up to work with a coach. Sometimes it's, actually joining the gym, doing the thing, like something where you look back and it's not this like vague, ambiguous, oh, it was around then. Like I know the day I read a book that I decided, and that's another key point is like make a decision and turn that desire to feel better into something and make it tangible. I mean, back into the ancient wisdom from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they used to use commitment devices, which is something that you do today that ensures that the future version of you that most likely will not have as much willpower, that will try to wiggle out of whatever you decide. A commitment device is a way to lock future you into a really good decision. And so it's one of the habit strategies, and it could be a financial commitment device. They work really well. Like I had a client once who it was around fall, and she wrote an email. She said, if I go to this bakery before Thanksgiving, I have to pay you $500.
Oh, geez.
And so, me, I'm like, oh gosh, I could never take her money. She goes, no, I need you to tell me you will. And it was funny, that commitment, some people, other financial ones they give money to a friend that maybe has a different, let's say, political view than them. And if they don't stick to something, the friend donates it to a cause you're not for.
I love that one.
Yeah. So that one's neat. But there's also, paying for a gym membership upfront. Financial ones just work really well. There's other kinds of commitment devices, but, putting your money where your mouth is, that hits home usually a lot for all of us.
Well, because once you have skin in the game, you're like, oh, this is real. Or, oh, I signed up for this race. It's in 9 months. I better get going because otherwise I'm going to show up and seem like a potato.
Yeah. And I've heard that before, like what we pay for, we pay attention to.
Yep.
And so we like to not believe that, but I even noticed that in myself. Like it could be if I had to pay for a podcast episode that's free, I probably would listen to it a lot closer and try to extract value. So like nobody's paying for this conversation, but what if you had given Ben and I money just for this conversation? How would you treat what we're talking about differently?
Yeah. And I think I love that. And I love just the ability to say, hey, sometimes we'll have it where you have a reward at the end where instead of you have to do something you don't like, it's here's a reward. You want to go to that restaurant or you want to, take that vacation or whatever it might be, making it so, hey, if I do this, I check the boxes every day. I did it. Awesome. If not, you have to start the streak over. And once you get to a streak of X number of days, you get fill in the blank. That I've noticed helps a lot with people as well.
Yeah. And like people are doing it with technology. There are containers you can buy with actually set timers. So you can't access phones
That's awesome.
for a certain amount of times. Yeah. So these commitment devices, it's almost like, I like to think of it where sometimes motivation is not getting motivated to do the thing in the moment, but maybe it's getting motivated to do something to set yourself up in one of these commitments like this, so that the future you doesn't have to work so hard because you've kind of taken care of him or her in a way that, understands the very realness of what it's like to be a human.
Well, and I feel like too, before I'm like, I love our rabbit hole, but I'm like, we're getting off the track of all the,
Let's go back.
So, which isn't a problem, but I always, just want to make sure we're on it. So with this too, like I know diabetes, I always joke is like buy one, get one free, sometimes get two free from an autoimmune standpoint if you're diagnosed with type 1. And obviously, as you've mentioned, like knocking on all of the wood, it does not sound like you have type 1 as of now, but fingers crossed never happens. But you obviously have demonstrated you have multiple autoimmune conditions as well. So in our field, the most common tend to be, the thyroid, and then celiac has an 8 times prevalence if you have type 1 diabetes compared to the rest of the population. But I've never gone into celiac on this show, and I don't want to go way into the weeds, but I do know you have some pretty intimate experience with it.
I do, very intimate. My first date with my husband, I was eating gluten-free for my autoimmunity reasons. And he kind of seemed like he was breaking bad news to me. He was like, well, I do have to tell you, I am celiac and I don't eat gluten. And I looked over and I said, I don't either. And the joy on his face was almost like, whoa. And I add that to the column of things that could be kind of good about these diagnoses, because I really almost seem like a perfect partner for somebody who had struggled before with having to eat different than other people, in his life. So yes, I'm married to someone with celiac. A lot of people with autoimmunity, whether it's one or multiple diagnoses, land on the experiment that they want to try no gluten. So there's a lot of, you can find controversial evidence everywhere about, does this really make a difference? Is it the United States gluten? Is it the different gluten? And so, the way that I coach and help people is there's some evidence that if you're curious about it, why not lean in and see how it feels not to have gluten, have some really good measures to track it and things like that. But yeah, the celiac side of that truly is a reason to say, okay, we're not going to have gluten anymore.
But I've been convinced for years that people with type 1 have a gluten and then a dairy like intolerance. Not necessarily full blown, you can't have it, but the blood sugars tend to get a little more angry when there's gluten or dairy in the picture. But to your point, could it be US based? Could it not be? I'm just convinced that it's not necessarily the greatest. I still eat both because I really like them. So that's where it gets tough, right?
Yeah. Well, honestly, gluten also, it's usually what it's packaged in. I mean, if everybody, was talking about like a homemade whole wheat pasta or like a homemade sourdough bread, most likely our bodies wouldn't be rebelling against it as much. Usually, if we say we're going to cut out ultra-processed foods, that ultimately eliminates a lot of junk and gluten that people end up feeling pretty good. But what happens is people think, okay, I'm going to get rid of gluten, but then they get so worried about, but what if I'm in Italy and there's wood-fired pizza and I want it? Well, that is the exception. Don't worry about the exception. What is the most of the time the things we're doing? And it's really fascinating to hear about blood sugars and dairy, because dairy is another one that is very controversial in the literature in terms of what it does related to autoimmunity and MS specifically. So it takes experimenting with it. But that's like another little data point there that I didn't really realize that blood sugar could be impacted by it.
Well, like a prime example of dairy would be, I had a patient the other day who was literally talking about, oh yeah, I had, Greek yogurt and some berries and everything was great. And then my blood sugar, like 45 minutes later, I took for all the carbs, everything was great. Boom, shot up by 100 points. And it happened multiple days in a row. It was likely the dairy and specifically the dairy protein. And I've seen that in my own life. I've seen it with at this point, dozens, if not hundreds of people with diabetes where dairy just does not always agree. And again, it doesn't mean you can't have it. It's the dairy protein and like whey protein, Greek yogurt, two biggest offenders by far.
And I know we're talking, your question was more around celiac, but now we drug dairy into it. But both of those things are really interesting because, and if you're out there, one like thinking, oh, I don't need to give up gluten because I'm not affected, or I don't need to give up dairy because I'm not affected. What those two things can affect in different people is so vastly different. Like my husband, when he eats dairy, gets a dark circle under his eyes, or there are other skin reactions. There's GI stuff. It's not all GI. Sometimes, when my husband gets glutenized, which is what he calls, whether it's a cross-contamination or something going on, his is brain fog, where I actually start to notice before he does that he almost seems a little drunk.
Yep.
And so I'll kind of call it out to him like, okay, I think in about 24 hours, your stomach's going to hurt. And then this is going to happen. It's kind of this chain reaction. But really opening your mind and being open in these experiments to say any symptom is on the table. Any marker is on the table, and so worth that experimenter's mindset to see if these are levers we can pull to ultimately feel better and let our bodies function the best that they're able to.
Well, and I think it should be a disclaimer similar to when you were mentioning with your husband, like gluten's going to be a massive deal. If you have diabetes and you haven't been diagnosed with celiac and you're like, hey, I'm okay, but maybe my numbers get a little funky, it could be worth saying, hey, I'm going to cut this out. But like you mentioned before, but if I want the wood-fired pizza while I'm in Italy, I'm going to go for it and have it versus you have celiac. There's no wood-fired pizza for you. Like that's not a good life decision.
Absolutely. That is so true. That sometimes I'll have things, that if my husband's with me, picking out a restaurant is totally different because I'm looking at what's the cross-contamination. And now there's some apps out there to help really find places that take it seriously and they're not using the same fryer and the same surface. If I'm on my own, I'm able to be a little bit more flexible and, not worry as much about cross-contamination, but never let great be the enemy of good. I mean, if something is scaring you about trying an experiment with your diet, whether it's gluten, whether it's dairy, take whatever that thing is and even put it off to the side and focus on the rest of it and, make those tiny steps towards it and recognize that your body may tell you almost immediately, and it makes the hard less hard when you have some good evidence as to what it's doing for you.
Well, and to your point, I think having, at least in diabetes land, the concrete, my blood sugar did this and it otherwise would not have. The patient from the other day, if they had the same thing with chicken instead of having the same thing with Greek yogurt, two completely different responses. And again, not saying chicken's superior, but something for people to note. So I feel like knowing your body and then making sure from a care team perspective that you have a care team that actually will dig into the trenches with you, I think cannot be understated.
Yeah, you really have, type 1 diabetes really has such a concrete number to work with. It's kind of like with supplements, like it is so hard to know what supplements are doing what, but that's vitamin D I love because it's like, oh yeah, you can get a number. When we can measure something, it really helps our brain get behind something. And when we can't, how do we find a not so concrete measure that still works in the same way? It's like taking the same idea, but assigning some objectivity to how you feel or a certain symptom so that it can have the same weight as something that happens to have a number. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, basically you're saying like have something qualitative, but something that you can still measure, even if it's how do I feel 1 to 10 versus, oh, my blood sugar is 137. That's two different things.
Yeah. I had a client once who was so interesting because she was, I can't remember whether it was a diet thing. When I work with people, it's habits across all these different areas: rest, sleep, connection, food, movement, all these things. But her sense at night on how she was doing with things was how full she felt. Not full like in her stomach, but like it was more this like energetic full. It kind of what I would maybe call like pride, but it was so unique to her, but she knew exactly what it meant. So she would come and like have that, oh my God, I'm going to bed feeling full. And it was just so unique to her. And it was a measure that mattered to her. And so, yeah, when we can find what those measures are, like sometimes I like to even include, what do other people notice about me? Like when it comes to changing habits, like do people notice a difference in how I'm feeling or thinking or the things I'm saying or various things? That's kind of a cool measure too, the impact you're having on others.
Well, and I want to circle back to what we were talking about with the restaurant stuff. 'Cause I know restaurant and celiac is a major area. I have a friend who's a dietitian. She basically does what I do, but it's all celiac related. But given your experience and your proximity to it, I'd love to hear kind of what that process looks like for picking out a restaurant to make sure that it's safe for your husband. And then obviously you're doing your damnedest to stay away from it as well.
Oh, that's a really good one. So just recently, this is a total hack and doesn't always work, but there's a couple paid apps that they have a team that is going out across the world and vetting restaurants. So they claim to talk to the staff. They claim to really get an understanding of their practices and their understanding of celiac. And so they rate it as 100% dedicated gluten-free, celiac friendly, gluten accommodating, and then kind of there is no parameter whatsoever. So there's these 4 ratings. So we're brand new to experimenting with that, and not every restaurant is on there. But that's just to say, with hope that some technology will be used for the good in that way. But other than that, from a gluten standpoint, it's kind of having an idea of, Italian, for example. You're going to Italian. All right, we know that a lot of places don't have gluten-free. Some do. It's really probably similar to when you're going in with type 1 diabetes. You kind of know what you're going to order.
Yep.
You know what's gluten-free. So, okay, how do I get a nice hunk of meat? If you do eat meat and that protein, or how do I get vegetables what is a question or two I can ask to try to parse out, is this going to be safe? So one question that people with celiac probably already know, but even if you're trying to avoid gluten, is do they share a workspace or do they share a fryer where they cook other gluten foods? So we've been to restaurants where it's labeled with the big wheat with the X through it that this is gluten-free. But you ask one question of, is this in the same fryer? And they say, oh yeah. And so then your red flags have to go up that, oh, okay, they may not be as aware. And so sometimes just asking a question, even asking for the manager, sometimes that in a very kind way, just to get a little bit behind it. And yeah, I would say questions are your friend. Know a couple takeaways. Like sometimes, oh my gosh, when someone walks up to the table and says, are there any allergies I need to know about? It's like, oh, you sigh and you're like, wow, you're proactively coming to me, so I'm not bothering you.
Right.
But I Google allergy-friendly restaurants. That's where I start with anything when we're traveling. And when we're with other people, it's wild because we always end up at people who take really good care of their food and their pride in their food. And so we've had friends say, even when we're not traveling with you, we actually do the same thing because we think that we get a different caliber of restaurant that is putting that attention behind it.
I didn't even think that, first of all, that people that have nothing to do with it was like, hey, I like this food better. But then second, I think having those couple questions, and you mentioned the manager, the first thing in my head comes like thinking of like how Karens would be like, give me the manager. But obviously we're not being Karens here. We're being just people that want to feel good when we leave.
Yeah. And speaking of mindset, like you said at the beginning, how wild would it be? I always say this is like my dream, is that right now what we call a dietary restriction, like words matter. If we are thinking that we are restricting something or that doesn't feel good, it feels like, ooh, well, then I want it. Imagine a world, this is my dream, where it is not a restriction, where it truly is a dietary preference. It doesn't need to be an allergy to honor it and to know, hey, this is how I feel good in my body. Like, I just would love that idea if we truly could not look at it as a restriction, because if we don't look at it as a restriction, it doesn't feel like a restriction. That's a true mindset hack as well, is what do I need to believe about this thing so that I'm not feeling like something's being kept from me.
Well, and I think that goes true for diabetes land, where it's, oh my goodness, I can't have fill in the blank. Instead, it's stop. How can I make this happen for me?
Yep.
What do I need to do to allow this to fit into my life, instead of, well, I can't have this. Like, there's always a way, again, with the exception of celiac and gluten, right? There's 99.9% of the time, there's a way to make it happen if you are smart, if you prepare, and if you just think just a little teeny bit ahead.
Well, and this one may help your listeners too, because there is this hack that I came across. I don't even know how I ended up with it, but now I'm like, I love it. I use it. A lot of us with sweets. Okay, let's say we want to dial down sweet. The craving, the dopamine, it's real. We're dealing with, the habit, but we also are dealing with some chemicals in our brain that are making it harder than it should be, right? And so with sweets, I have this idea that I teach my clients, and I actually have a podcast episode on it, but it's called being a sugar snob. So it's like stepping into an identity of somebody who doesn't have to say no to sugar always if you don't want to. Let's say you want to have some sugar in your life, whether for joy or celebration or you just don't want to feel like it's driving you. You want to be able to choose when you have it and how much. And so this identity of being a sugar snob, you get to define what that means for you. But one of my definitions of a sugar snob for myself is if there are employees sitting around a boardroom that are discussing how to make this more craveable, how to make us not be able to stop it, how to increase the mouthfeel and the dopamine hit from it, then I want to be snobby about that and say, you don't deserve an invitation into my home, which is my body. And so, or, another client of mine who's just recently like exploring being a sugar snob, she's like, if you can get it at a 7-Eleven, I'm too snobby to eat you. So then all of a sudden, like you're choosing homemade things that maybe you put some effort into and you made or your grandmother made, and like starting to redefine, I'm not being restricted from anything. I am just choosing wisely.
Actively. And I feel like optionality is the biggest thing, right? Like you could go into 7-Eleven and say, I want the fill in the blank, candy bar, or I want to go in and get this, the combos, or I think that they still make combos, but either way.
I've eaten a lot of combos in my day.
Right. So like, some sort of snack, but the key is, and I feel like, again, all autoimmune is you have the option to, but is it going to serve me? Is it not going to serve? And if it serves me, cool, I can go make it happen. Or if it's, birthday and you want to have the cake, there's a way to do it. But again, it doesn't have to be a every single day or constant thing. Like make it special. I always tell 90-10, 90% of the time you're doing the things that are, nourishing your body. They're doing the things you need to do. Keep your numbers happy, keep everything in line. The other 10% of the time, enjoy it because life's too short to not enjoy food you love.
Totally. And just that thought, I love food too much to give up this. That doesn't even make sense. Like I love food so much that I do this, like it's kind of just playing with which mindset or wording resonates with you and makes sense, because somebody can really love food and not consume it in a way that kind of wrecks your body or leads to not good things in your body.
I was going to say, I feel like it's all about just being intentional.
And
so many people don't. Like I will say, like I'm grateful for all the diabetes technology out there, but a lot of it, I remember being in PhD school during my little foray before I left to become a dietitian, and the pumps were starting to become more widespread and the CGM were starting to get more widespread. And people were just like, I can eat anything now. This is incredible. And you absolutely can.
Yep.
I mean, it's the best option for your life in that moment or just in general.
Yeah. Intention is everything. Habits. I mean, that's why I love habits so much. Like notice every time you say, like someone the other day said, I wish I need to be more deliberate about this. And I said, reword that. You want to make it a habit, because then when all of a sudden we frame it as a habit, we know how to do that. I mean, the habit science and, my entire work is, okay, when we frame it as a habit, now let's work with our brain, with our body, and make that the thing that's on autopilot.
Well, and I have to ask, because we've talked a lot about habits, you see the thing that say, a habit takes 3 weeks to form. Like, what is your number that you would say is the magic number to have something really, truly stick?
Honestly, I can't pick a number because there is so much good science. His name is BJ Fogg. He wrote Tiny Habits. And he says if he could boil down his decades of habit research into 3 words, it would be emotions create habit. So what I take from that is how long it takes to make or break a habit is tied to the emotional connection that you have to it. So if you have a strong emotional connection, either for it or not doing the thing, then it's going to take a little bit longer. Like I have some clients, we do a kind of call it a little sprint where we take a habit a couple times a year that just feels really hard. And we kind of throw all of our different strategies at it and we like keep it top of mind. And it was so funny because one client, it was like day 3 and we had given ourselves like the month. So it's like day 3, she's like, I think I'm out. I think I'm done because apparently it didn't have the pull I thought. And it was like, this habit just sticks really quick. And so sometimes it's just this awareness and setting yourself up with a couple strategies, whether it's environment, whether it's a mindset shift that kind of changes everything. And it can happen really quick. And then sometimes, as somebody who truly feels like I've mastered habits, I still have some that creep back up. I still have some that I am using the strategies on all the time. Like small crunchy things in bags is my kryptonite. And I will have some seasons where I do better, where I just avoid it. I kind of do the freedom from restriction. Like I have freedom that I just don't even look at it. And then sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I want to have a little bit, but then it creeps up. So some may stick with us and they'll keep us humble and keep us coming back and applying the strategies again and again. But some of them, they don't have to take that long. A simple mindset shift, a simple strategy here or there that just works really well for that certain habit. And then especially kind of back to what we talked about, when we can pair it with a benefit that we maybe would have missed if we weren't looking for it, that is like gasoline on the habit change fire, because then it's almost like in our bones and in our body, it knows the difference. It's kind of like if you were celiac and you ate it and your body, got violently ill. It's like finding a way to let your body see some of those long-term benefits, but like shorten that time so that we are able to recognize those in the moment. Does that make sense?
I think so, because I think a lot of it, like you're saying, is you want it instead of being, oh, well, if you keep your blood sugars great, you'll feel great 10 years from now. People don't see that. They can't, it's really hard to think 10 years from now, what's going to happen? Where am I going to be?
Yeah.
If it's 10 minutes from now, that's a very different conversation,
Yeah. And if I had to pick a number, I love a month, because a month gives you space to learn a little bit about yourself. It gets you repetitions. It gets you chance to fall off, but get back on and realize that just because you fell off does not mean that you're not a consistent person and it's never going to happen. So if you are out there with a hard to break habit, if you go all in, learn something new, do something different for a month, go at it, I think that gives you a really good idea.
Well, and I feel like we've done a really good deep dive on the habits, which I feel like, again, something that doesn't get talked about enough that I'm grateful we were able to. And then a nice, intro on the celiac side. But I am curious. I ask every guest that comes on the show. Usually I say, what's, your number one X factor that for blood sugars that people don't usually think about. But in our case here, what would be your number one X factor for making sure autoimmune conditions don't take over your life that people just don't talk about enough or emphasize enough that you think is really impactful?
I would say that, that's such a good question.
There's probably like 7 you could do, but
I know I want to pick one that maybe people are not expecting. I would say that the inner habits, which what we talked about, those, how we're looking at it, how we're feeling about it. I think those inner habits are just as important, if not more important than the outer habits. How you're eating, how you're moving, how you're stressing. We need them all. But if we try to do the actions without going to the root, those inner layers of really challenging some of our beliefs, kind of how you mentioned the thought challenge, I think is what you called it. If we try to go only to the action without a really good understanding and practice to continually, have a mindset that serves us, then I think it's going to feel way tougher than it needs to.
I don't think anyone said that. I don't think anyone's ever talked about the mindset side as the X factor, which I would agree 100%.
Yeah. And it's easy for me to say that because it truly is what changed my health in my life. Right. I mean, I was eating the right things, moving. I was check, doing all this. It was not until I found my first coach and started working on my mindset behind it that all those other things got even better. And just my experience of life, like habits are up to 50% of our day. So think about how we are walking around, talking to ourselves, what we're thinking, what we're saying, how we're feeling. If we can make those habitual thoughts and feelings more nourishing and kind and useful, like what a better environment to live in.
Well, it's all perspective. It is literally, you could have the same situation. I tell people all the time, they're like, oh, well, my blood sugar is terrible. It's like, no, you are choosing to see it as terrible. Like your number is 222. Is it ideal? No, but acknowledge, respond, move on. Like,
I learned ARM from you.
Exactly. Yeah. I was going to say, that's it, right? Is this, you deal, move on. It can be, you put the meaning behind a number, you put the meaning behind everything. And so at that point, challenge the thought, ask yourself how you can adjust this and go on and live your life again. But I'm grateful. I feel like we barely scratched the surface of what we could have talked about. We didn't even get into the hypothyroid stuff. So I'm like, that could be a whole nother episode in and of itself.
It could. And if you guys want to hear us more, we were over on the Habit Hub for Autoimmune Health podcast and Ben dropped ARM, the acknowledge, respond, move on, and a lot of other good wisdom. So yeah, there is more waiting for you.
Well, and I was going to say, where can people find your podcast and your platform in case they have questions for you, they want to learn more?
Absolutely. One place, so you're listening to a podcast, so obviously you're into podcasts. The Habit Hub for Autoimmune Health is the name of the podcast, and there's 100 plus episodes to enjoy. And we cover from mindset, food, movement, stress, all the good stuff. I'm also on Instagram at Amy Behimer Coaching. And yeah, any other goodness about doing some of this work is at amybehimercoaching.com.
Perfect. And no, I'm grateful we got to do this. This was a lot of fun. And I'm pretty positive we'll have another one in the future to make sure we're continuing the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say one more thing. I know that we've gone on, but I do have a quiz. I love one thing that connects us is our tying what we're talking about to action today. And so the quiz was created to help you identify what your next number one habit could be, meaning which one is likely going to help you feel better, reduce inflammation, increase energy, because choosing the right habit to work on, I'm stealing this quote from someone, I think James Clear, the best habit is to choose the right one to work on. So the quiz gives you a personalized result. It's just a few questions, and it lands you on, okay, if I have this motivation and this energy, what area should I start with? And the results will give you what that area is and then some resources to help you do it. And so that we can put the link in the show notes as well, but that's amybehimercoaching.com/quiz. So that's a great place to start.
I was going to say, we can drop that link into the show notes as well, so people can make sure they can just click it instead of having to go dig around. So
yeah, no digging.
Now, this has been great. I'm grateful we got to do this. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, we get to have you on again and finish the other autoimmune things, because there's 9 million other ones we didn't talk about. But no, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Right back at you. All right. See you soon.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.